For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh. Today we are talking about another Fantasia Festival official selection. This is Foreigner. It depicts the story of a Persian family that moves into Canada, and the daughter of said family befriends a group of local friends and experiences deadly consequences. So there is a very familiar notion to Foreigner, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just going to remind you of other movies, and that's really kind of what I'm going to talk about first, just to kind of get it out of the way. For one, the setup of this movie is going to feel very, very familiar. It's hard to deny the influence of John Hughes films, but specifically on Foreigner, this film feels very inspired by Mean Girls. A lot of the kind of setup for our protagonist, Yasmina, definitely feels very reminiscent of Katie's journey throughout the course of this film. Stylistically, this movie also reminded me of a New Zealand movie that was released earlier this year via Shudder, and that would be Grafted. This movie almost hits a lot of those same notes, having a very subtle body horror twist to it, and it is, again, one of the stronger elements in this, and I'll talk more about it as we extend. Also, this movie is fantastic if you haven't seen it. As the film kind of progresses towards its second half, there are a lot of visual cues that also feel very inspired by last year's I Saw the TV Glow as well. Another phenomenal movie. This movie does pull from a lot of inspiration from other sources that are all of exceptional quality, and I'm just going to say it very early on, in turn makes this movie also a very well done picture. But there's one other movie that I am also going to talk about in comparison to how I feel about this movie, and that is this year's Death of a Unicorn, which is currently streaming on Max, that you can decide for yourself how you feel about it, but it's specifically about how that film handled genre. So if you had not had the pleasure yet to see Death of a Unicorn, one of my biggest problems with it, and when I've talked to other people specifically about it, it's also a common problem I find, is the way that the film handles tone and genre. For one, it's one part fantasy, it's one part comedy, it's one part horror, but it's never fantastical enough to be considered fantasy, it's never funny enough to be considered comedy, and it's never scary enough to consider it's a horror. Instead, it just kind of exists for as long as the story needs to exist within a certain genre before moving on. It's kind of a messy movie, all in all. And that's somewhat my biggest complaint about Foreigner, is that it feels like it handles tone and genre the same way. First two acts of this movie feel very reminiscent of John Hughes movies and the aforementioned Mean Girls. It works really well as part drama and part coming of age. I think it hits those notes really well. But it feels like it's lighthearted enough to where it should feel like a comedy, but there's not really anything worth laughing at here. And I don't know if that's intentional to kind of feel like a fake out comedy the way that this movie does, but it kind of adds to the tension. So I kind of have this like love-hate relationship with it, because I feel like I should be laughing, but I'm not. But that tension is also making me uncomfortable, and it's kind of working its way under my skin. On top of that tension, there is this body horror and kind of just like WTF moments that exist throughout these first two acts before the final act takes this deep plunge into the horror genre, becoming completely something else entirely. And the break between the coming of age lightheartedness of the first two acts into that horror does feel like a hard left, but it works, kind of. It's kind of a messy transition. If I'm honest, I didn't feel like it worked as well as I wanted it to. And I definitely think that had there been a little bit more of the horror elements sprinkled into these first two acts, or even as early as the 15-minute mark, I think this movie would have worked a lot better as it transitioned fully into genre rather than just kind of being this left turn into body horror. One of the things I feel like this movie does remarkably well is how it develops, not just its character of Yasmina, our protagonist, but also the Persian lifestyle, tradition, and belief system as well. For me, that coming into this movie, not having a firm grasp on a lot of that tradition, that lifestyle, or that knowledge of beliefs, I think this movie does a really good job at giving the viewer enough to go off to really be impacted emotionally by some of the roller coaster ride of emotions that you experience. I think this movie also does an incredible job at presenting the high school experience really well and having both of those kind of worlds with the Persian beliefs and lifestyle and traditions, kind of the home life of Yasmina running alongside of the high school version, where you have the traditional high school movie expectations of partying, peer pressure, kind of new experiences that go against what you are traditionally led to believe as a teenager. I think the two of them work really well. And I think the reason that it works as well as it does is because of the script from Ava Maria Safai, as well as the performance, let me rephrase that, the incredible performance by Rose Dehgan. The range of Dehgan is remarkable, to say the least. She is vulnerable, goofy, and even at times very menacing. And I think that the complexities of the character of Yasmina work really well, and you need a really strong performer to bring those to life. And I think alongside of the direction and writing from Safai, Dehgan just absolutely is part of the reason that this movie works as well as it does. Pacing of this movie is nothing short of impeccable. This movie has just hits the ground running, kind of has a little bit of that slow start, but I really do love the way that this movie kind of takes its time at development. Like I said, it is incredible, but also I love the way this movie ends. It ends in a really unexpected way that I really was not expecting to feel at the end of this movie. And again, I think those are the hallmarks of good storytelling and expert pacing. With that said, I'm ready to run Foreigner through our Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Foreigner an official selection of Fantasia Fest 2025 a 4 out of 5. I thought this movie was incredible. Nothing short of incredible. This movie feels like a love letter to Mean Girls and John Hughes, while also embracing a lot more of those gross body horror elements very subtly, while also having these very compelling character moments and family dynamics running juxtaposed to the high school experience, and just how differently those worlds really are and how hard it can be on mental health. And I think this movie just hits every note of those incredibly well. I think a lot of it comes down to the exceptional performance from Rose Dehgan, as well as the amazing script and direction from Ava Maria Safai. As of this video, there are currently no plans for distribution that I am aware of when it comes to Foreigner. However, in the show notes below, you guys will find more information on this year's festivals, as well as our social media. And what we do when we cover festivals like this is we try and update on our social media when we hear about movies like Foreigner getting a wider release past the festival circuit. So follow us on our socials, but let's talk about mental health, shall we? If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the film which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. Without getting too much into the spoilers of this movie, I will say one of the things that I feel like this film articulates very well is the importance of identity and ultimately the role that it has on your mental health. With Foreigner being a coming-of-age story, obviously the themes of identity are very crucial to the development that a child or a teenager has into adulthood and how they see the world and how they form. But even past that, I think it's also a valid conversation for us to have well into adulthood and into the different seasons, because at the end of the day, having one's self and being at peace with your identity and being firm in who you are going to, despite what society may tell you, are going to be leaps and bounds better for you and the peace of your mental health than anything else. Identity is a subject that we don't talk about nearly enough, and it's kind of ironic that we don't talk about it enough because it's this strange amalgamation of political values, religious beliefs, art, fandom, sports, job, etc. Like, there's sexuality, there's so many different factors that funnel into the subject of identity and the things that we attach ourselves and proclaim as our identity. Even with all of those crazy factors and influences that make up, it's very easy, as we see here in Foreigner, to be kind of pulled. But again, it is going to be what you want and what you claim, and the crazy intricacies that make up the DNA of your identity is going to be vital to your mental health. I'll be vulnerable with you guys. Those days that I have my strongest sense of mental health are the days that I have the strongest sense of identity and self-worth. I think back to every choice and every decision that I have made along the way in my 30-some years on this earth that have placed me where I am at that moment in time. And the days that I don't have an understanding or I don't have a grasp on my identity are the days that I feel the shittiest. So my question for you is going to be, who are you? Who or what makes up your identity and your values? And when was the last time you asked yourself that question? If you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please consider the links in our show notes below. Check out our mental health resource library. Foreigner is an official selection of Fantasia Festival 2025, and as of this video, there are currently no plans for distribution past Fantasia. However, in the show notes below, you guys will find links to our social media. Consider following us on other platforms. What we like to do is we traditionally try and share release dates and distribution information as we get them, so that you guys can kind of see the films that we are talking about when we cover festivals like Fantasia. In the show notes below, you guys will also find links to our mental health resource library. As mentioned, more movie reviews like this, links to our podcast network, how to support us financially, and that follow button. So until next time, remember to keep it classy and keep it spooky. Have a great night.